I can't believe it's over. Why now? Why like this? This can't be happening.
Eight months pregnant, Emily Carter sat alone in a cold hospital corridor at almost midnight, with a pair of divorce papers trembling in her hands, while her husband's phone rang unanswered for the 17th time. Just 12 hours earlier, Daniel Carter had kissed her forehead, told her he loved her, and promised he would be back before her doctor's appointment. But Daniel never came back. Instead, a courier arrived carrying a manila envelope with legal documents that ended 11 years of marriage in less than 3 pages. Nurses walked past Emily, pretending not to stare while she struggled to breathe through tears and contractions at the same time. She kept rereading the final sentence written beneath Daniel's signature. "I can no longer continue this marriage. No explanation, no warning, no apology, just silence. The kind of silence that changes a person forever." And what Emily still did not know that night was that the man she had trusted with her entire life had spent years hiding secrets capable of destroying more than just their marriage. Because within 6 months, Daniel Carter's name would explode across courtrooms, news headlines, and television screens across America after a judge uncovered evidence so shocking that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand how one man had managed to fool so many people for so long. An empty nursery waited inside Emily's suburban home, while unopened baby gifts sat stacked near the staircase beside framed family photographs that suddenly felt fake. Friends who once called Daniel the perfect husband would soon discover they had never truly known him at all. Detectives would uncover hidden financial records, secret apartments, false identities, and DNA reports that raised terrifying questions about the man everyone thought they understood. And when the custody hearings finally began, a single piece of evidence would force an entire courtroom into complete silence. A mother started crying near the back row. One attorney removed his glasses and stared down at the floor. Even the judge needed several moments before speaking again, because the truth about Daniel Carter was far worse than anyone imagined. He did not simply leave his pregnant wife. He had been living an entirely different life. A life built on lies so carefully constructed that Emily had spent over a decade sleeping beside a stranger without realizing it. And by the time she finally understood who Daniel really was, it was already too late to escape the damage he had left behind. This story begins in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods outside Chicago, where Daniel and Emily Carter appeared to have the kind of marriage people envied. They lived in a beautiful two-story home lined with maple trees and white fences, where neighbors waved during morning jogs and children played safely until sunset. Daniel owned a financial consulting company that worked with small business investors, while Emily worked part-time as a pediatric therapist after years of balancing work and fertility treatments. Friends described them as polished, successful, and deeply in love. Their social media pages showed romantic vacations, anniversary dinners, and smiling family gatherings that looked almost too perfect to be real. But often the most dangerous lies are hidden inside lives that appear ordinary from the outside. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the deeper investigators looked into Daniel Carter's life, the more disturbing the truth became. And what started as a heartbreaking divorce quickly transformed into one of the most disturbing courtroom scandals their community had ever witnessed. The first signs appeared slowly enough for Emily to ignore them. Daniel began working later than usual, often returning home after midnight, smelling like expensive cologne she did not recognize. He guarded his phone constantly and started stepping outside to answer calls even during family dinners. At first, Emily blamed stress. Daniel's company had recently expanded into multiple states, and he often complained about difficult clients and financial pressure. Emily wanted to believe him, because trust had been the foundation of their marriage for years. But trust can blind people just as easily as love can. Around the 7th month of her pregnancy, Emily noticed Daniel had become emotionally distant in ways she could not explain. He stopped touching her stomach when the baby kicked. He barely spoke during meals. Some nights he would sit silently in the dark living room long after midnight, staring at nothing, while Emily listened from the hallway, wondering what had changed inside the man she married. Then one evening, she woke up at nearly 2 in the morning and realized Daniel was no longer in bed. She walked downstairs and heard his voice through the kitchen window. He was outside, speaking softly on the phone. Emily could not hear every word clearly, but one sentence froze her completely in place. "She can't find out yet." Emily confronted Daniel the next morning, expecting denial or excuses, but what she saw instead frightened her more than anger ever could. Daniel looked terrified. For a brief moment, his entire expression changed, as though he had been caught protecting something far more serious than an affair. Then, almost instantly, he regained control of himself and accused Emily of becoming paranoid because of pregnancy hormones. He told her she was exhausted, emotional, and imagining problems that did not exist. Emily apologized by the end of the argument, even though deep down she knew something felt terribly wrong. Over the following weeks, Daniel became even colder. He started sleeping in the guest room, claiming he needed uninterrupted rest before business meetings. Large withdrawals appeared from their joint account without explanation. Emily discovered unfamiliar credit card charges from hotels downtown, expensive restaurants, and jewelry stores she had never visited. Yet, every time she asked questions, Daniel somehow turned the conversation back onto her. He told her stress was bad for the baby. He told her she needed therapy. He told her she was destroying their marriage with suspicion. And slowly, Emily began questioning her own instincts instead of questioning him. Then came the morning that changed everything forever. Emily woke up just after 7 and noticed Daniel's side of the bed was empty. At first, she assumed he had left early for work. But when she walked downstairs, she found his closet half empty and several drawers missing from his office desk. A single envelope sat on the kitchen counter beside her prenatal vitamins. Inside were divorce papers already signed by Daniel Carter. Emily stood frozen in silence while reading the words over and over, unable to process what was happening. After 11 years together, after years of fertility struggles, after finally becoming pregnant with the child they had both prayed for, Daniel had vanished without even saying goodbye. She called him repeatedly until voicemail answered every attempt. By that evening, his number had been disconnected entirely. Emily later admitted that part of her still believed Daniel would return and explain everything. But he never did. Instead, over the next several weeks, the situation became even more terrifying. Their joint bank account was nearly empty. Mortgage payments stopped processing. Utility notices began arriving in the mail. Emily discovered Daniel had transferred massive amounts of money into accounts she did not recognize. And then, just when she thought the nightmare could not become worse, she received a message online from a woman named Olivia Bennett that began with a sentence Emily would never forget. "I think your husband has been lying to both of us." Emily stared at the message for nearly 10 minutes before responding. Her hands shook so badly, she almost dropped the phone onto the kitchen floor. At first, she assumed it had to be some kind of cruel scam created by someone who somehow learned about her divorce. But there was something about the wording that unsettled her deeply. The woman did not sound angry. She sounded devastated. Emily finally replied with only 3 words. "Who are you?" The answer came seconds later. "My name is Olivia Bennett. I've been in a relationship with Daniel for 3 years." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She reread the sentence repeatedly, hoping she misunderstood it. 3 years. That meant while Emily was enduring fertility treatments, miscarriages, and surgeries trying to save their dream of having a child, Daniel had apparently been building another life somewhere else. Olivia asked to meet in person and sent a photo of herself sitting beside Daniel at what looked like a restaurant. The timestamp in the corner of the image showed it had been taken only 4 months earlier during the exact weekend. Daniel claimed he was attending a business conference in Denver. Emily recognized the shirt immediately because she had bought it for his birthday. The next afternoon, they met inside a quiet coffee shop nearly 40 minutes outside the city, where neither woman was likely to recognize anyone they knew. Olivia appeared exhausted, nervous, and visibly embarrassed. She kept apologizing before even sitting down. Emily expected to hate her immediately, but instead she saw another woman who looked just as manipulated and emotionally destroyed as she felt herself.
I'm so sorry. I have to
Olivia
tell you
explained she
something.
met Daniel
3
through a
years
real
ago,
estate
I met
investment
Daniel
seminar in
Carter,
Milwaukee.
but he told me his name was
Almost 3
David.
years earlier,
I didn't
he
know
introduced
until
himself as
recently.
David Carter, claimed he was divorced, and told her he had no children. According to Olivia, Daniel painted himself as a lonely businessman, rebuilding his life after a painful separation. He visited her apartment multiple weekends every month, took vacations with her, met some of her friends, and even discussed marriage. Emily listened silently while pieces of her marriage collapsed one by one inside her mind. The dates Olivia mentioned overlapped perfectly with business trips Daniel had taken throughout the years. Every conference, every overnight meeting, every emergency client visit suddenly transformed into evidence of deception. But the most disturbing part came when Olivia pulled out her phone and showed Emily dozens of photographs. Daniel looked genuinely happy in them, relaxed, comfortable, like a completely different person than the cold stranger Emily had lived with. During the final year of their marriage, Olivia admitted she only discovered the truth after seeing Emily's public Facebook profile announcement about her pregnancy. At first, Olivia thought there had to be some mistake because Daniel repeatedly insisted he had no wife and no family. When she confronted him, he disappeared completely for several days, before eventually returning with another explanation. He claimed Emily was mentally unstable and obsessed with him after their divorce. He insisted the pregnancy was not his child. Olivia wanted to believe him until she noticed contradictions piling up faster than his excuses. Then one night, Daniel accidentally left behind a leather portfolio inside her apartment containing tax records, bank statements, and legal documents under multiple names. Olivia quietly photographed everything before returning it. When she showed the images to Emily across the table, Emily felt genuine fear for the first time. Some accounts listed Daniel as Daniel Carter. Others used the name David Collins. One property document carried another variation entirely. Daniel Reed. Different addresses, different signatures, different financial histories. It no longer looked like ordinary cheating. It looked organized, intentional, almost professional. Emily suddenly understood why Daniel reacted with panic the night she overheard him outside. He was not afraid of being exposed for an affair. He was afraid his entire identity was beginning to unravel. The two women spent hours comparing timelines, receipts, messages, and photographs until the horrifying pattern became impossible to ignore. Daniel had carefully separated every part of his life with almost military precision. He used different phones for different relationships, different email addresses, different social circles. Olivia revealed that Daniel refused to let her post photographs of them online and always insisted on paying bills in cash during trips together. He claimed he valued privacy because of business competitors, but now the explanations sounded ridiculous. Emily began remembering strange moments she once dismissed without question. Daniel never allowed unexpected visitors into his office. He avoided neighborhood gatherings unless Emily attended with him. He became defensive anytime conversations turned toward his childhood or family history. Even his stories about college changed slightly over the years, depending on who was listening. Looking back now, Emily realized she had spent over a decade accepting fragments instead of truths. The man she married had built his life like someone constructing a maze, carefully controlling what every person could see while hiding entire sections from view. And somewhere inside that maze was the reason he abandoned his pregnant wife without warning. Over the next several weeks, Emily and Olivia formed an uneasy alliance driven by equal parts anger and desperation. Emily hired a forensic accountant, using borrowed money from her older brother, while Olivia began tracing Daniel's online activity through archived business records and property databases. What they discovered shocked even the private investigator Emily eventually hired. Daniel secretly owned a small apartment in Indianapolis under the name David Collins. Utility bills connected him to another address in St. Louis. One banking document referenced monthly child support payments tied to a county neither woman recognized. The investigator initially believed Daniel might simply be hiding assets during the divorce, until another discovery changed the entire direction of the case. A high school yearbook photograph surfaced online, connected to an old legal filing from nearly 16 years earlier. The filing involved a woman named Rachel Mercer, who once accused a man named Daniel Reed of abandoning her during pregnancy before disappearing entirely. Emily stared at the scanned court document, while her heart pounded violently inside her chest. The birth date matched Daniel perfectly. So did the photograph attached to the record. The only difference was the last name, Rachel Mercer had disappeared from public records shortly after filing the complaint. No social media, no forwarding address, nothing. The case had eventually closed after the defendant failed to appear in court. Emily suddenly realized she might not be dealing with a dishonest husband. She might be dealing with someone who had spent years reinventing himself over and over again. The investigator warned Emily to be careful, because people who maintain multiple identities often become dangerous once exposed. Yet Emily refused to stop searching. She had already lost her marriage, her financial stability, and almost her sense of reality itself. The only thing she still possessed was the truth, and even that remained incomplete. Then, late one evening, while reviewing financial transfers connected to Daniel's consulting company, the forensic accountant discovered something that changed everything. Large monthly payments had been sent for years into an account registered under a teenage girl's name, and according to school enrollment records connected to that account, the girl's father was listed as Daniel Reed. Emily felt physically sick after reading the report. For several long moments, she simply stared at the teenage girl's school enrollment form, while Olivia sat silently beside her at the dining room table. The document listed a 16-year-old girl named Sophie Reed living outside St. Louis with her mother, Angela Monroe. Under emergency contact information, the father's name appeared clearly in black ink, Daniel Reed. Emily covered her mouth, trying to process what she was seeing. Daniel had hidden an entire child from her for years, a child almost old enough to drive. Questions crashed through her mind, faster than she could answer them. How long had this been going on? How many lies had Daniel told to protect himself? And most terrifying of all, how many other people exist out there connected to the man she thought she knew? Olivia broke the silence first. "We need to find Angela." Emily nodded slowly, but deep inside she already feared what another conversation might uncover. Because every new layer of Daniel's life seemed darker than the last one, the private investigator arranged a discreet meeting with Angela Monroe 2 days later at a small diner outside St. Louis. Emily arrived exhausted from lack of sleep and emotionally drained from weeks of revelations. Yet nothing prepared her for the expression on Angela's face when Daniel's photograph was placed on the table between them. Angela immediately looked away as though seeing a ghost. Her hands trembled slightly while she whispered, "I prayed I would never hear his name again." Emily felt chills spread through her entire body. Angela explained, "She
I met
Daniel
Daniel
nearly 17
17
years
ago.
earlier when he introduced himself as
He
Daniel
introduced
Reed,
himself as Daniel
an
Reed.
ambitious investment consultant
We have a daughter
building a
together.
financial startup. He was charming, generous, attentive, and deeply convincing. Within a year, Angela became pregnant with Sophie. At first, Daniel seemed excited about becoming a father. But everything changed during the pregnancy. He started disappearing for days without explanation. He became emotionally distant. Then suddenly, only weeks before Sophie was born, he vanished completely. Angela later discovered most of the personal information he gave her was false. Addresses did not exist. Employment histories could not be verified. Even the name Daniel Reed appeared connected to almost no official records before their relationship began. Angela admitted. She spent years trying to track him down through courts and child support agencies, but every lead eventually disappeared. Occasionally, small payments arrived anonymously through money transfer services, enough to suggest Daniel was watching from a distance, but refusing to fully acknowledge his daughter. Sophie grew up believing her father simply abandoned them because he no longer cared. Angela never imagined he had moved to another state, changed identities, married another woman, and started building another family. Emily struggled to hold back tears while listening because every detail mirrored her own experience almost perfectly. The same emotional withdrawal, the same secrecy, the same sudden disappearance during pregnancy. It felt less like coincidence and more like a pattern Daniel had perfected over many years. Then Angela revealed something even more disturbing. About 6 months before Daniel disappeared from their lives, she found paperwork hidden inside his apartment connected to another woman in Ohio. At the time, she assumed it involved business clients. Now she was no longer sure. "I don't think either of us were the first," Angela said quietly. "And I don't think you'll be the last." That sentence haunted Emily for days afterward. Sleep became almost impossible. Every memory from her marriage now felt contaminated by uncertainty. She replayed years of conversations, wondering how many moments had been real and how many were carefully performed. Friends continued calling to check on her. But Emily stopped explaining the situation because the truth sounded unbelievable even to her. How could one man maintain multiple identities across different states for years without anyone noticing? How had no employer, bank, or agency connected the inconsistency sooner? The deeper investigators searched, the clearer the answer became. Daniel survived because people trusted appearances. He dressed professionally, spoke confidently, paid bills on time, and understood exactly how to present himself as respectable. Most victims of manipulation never realize they are being manipulated until long after the damage is done. Daniel understood that better than anyone. He targeted women, searching for stability, commitment, and emotional safety. Then, once relationships became serious and expectations increased, he disappeared before his carefully controlled lies collapsed completely. But this time, something had gone wrong. Emily's pregnancy, combined with the financial investigation tied to the divorce, created a trail too large for Daniel to erase quickly enough. Meanwhile,
Our
public attention
investigation has
around the
uncovered a
case
shocking double life.
He
began
used
after
shell
one
companies
local
to hide
reporter
assets.
obtained partial court
His fraud
records
spans
connected
years,
to
with
Emily's
millions diverted.
divorce
We'll
filing.
continue tracking the
At
money
first,
trail.
the story appeared online as a small article about a wealthy businessman accused of hiding assets during a separation. But once anonymous sources hinted at multiple identities and possible fraud, interest exploded across social media. News stations started requesting interviews. Online communities began searching public databases for information connected to Daniel's various names. Former coworkers stepped forward, describing strange behavior they once ignored. One former employee claimed Daniel frequently traveled under different versions of his name depending on the state. Another remembered him panicking after receiving certified mail several years earlier from Missouri family court officials. The image of the successful suburban husband quickly transformed into something far more unsettling. Daniel Carter was no longer just a cheating spouse. He was becoming the center of a growing investigation stretching across multiple states, with questions nobody could fully answer yet. Then came the discovery that pushed the case into national headlines. During a formal review of Daniel's consulting company finances, investigators uncovered evidence of fraudulent business loans filed under at least two alternate identities. Millions of dollars had moved between shell companies connected to addresses where no actual businesses existed. Some records suggested Daniel used personal relationships to gain access to financial information and lines of credit connected to women he dated or married. Prosecutors immediately expanded the investigation beyond divorce and custody matters into potential criminal fraud charges. Emily watched the news coverage from her living room in complete disbelief. Reporters stood outside the courthouse, discussing the possibility that Daniel Carter had spent nearly 2 decades operating under multiple identities while manipulating relationships for financial gain. Yet despite the growing media storm, nobody could locate Daniel himself. His phones remained disconnected. Credit cards stopped appearing in transaction records. Even the apartment in Indianapolis had been emptied almost overnight. It was as if he vanished the moment investigators got too close. But 3 weeks later, just as Emily prepared for another difficult court hearing alone, authorities finally received a tip that changed everything. Daniel Carter had been spotted checking into a private hotel outside Denver using the name David Collins. Federal marshals arrived at the Denver hotel just before sunrise expecting Daniel Carter to attempt another escape. But according to later reports, he barely reacted when officers knocked on the suite door. One investigator would eventually describe him as strangely calm, almost relieved. Daniel surrendered quietly without resistance, while carrying a passport under the name David Collins and nearly $40,000 in cash hidden inside a travel bag. The arrest footage spread across national news within hours. Emily watched the broadcast from her brother's living room while holding her stomach in silence as reporters repeated phrases like multiple identities, financial fraud, and possible serial deception scheme. Yet even after the arrest, authorities still underestimated how complicated the case truly was. During questioning, Daniel denied nearly everything. He claimed misunderstandings, paperwork errors, and jealous former partners had created a false narrative around him. He insisted he never intentionally abandoned anyone and argued that his alternate names were connected to business restructuring and privacy concerns. But investigators had already begun comparing years of records across several states, and the evidence forming against him painted a far different picture. By the time Daniel was transported back to Illinois for court proceedings, prosecutors believed they were dealing with a man who had spent nearly 20 years carefully constructing interchangeable identities to manipulate relationships, finances, and legal obligations without detection. The courtroom was overflowing on the morning Daniel Carter finally faced formal questioning. Reporters crowded the
We're here
hallway
awaiting the verdict in
outside
this
while
high-profile
strangers
case.
lined up,
Sir, what is the
hoping to
defense's main
witness
argument?
the hearing that had
They
consumed
maintain the
news
evidence
cycles
is
for
insufficient
weeks.
for a conviction.
Emily arrived quietly through a side entrance, wearing a loose navy dress that barely concealed the final weeks of her pregnancy. Olivia sat beside her. Angela Monroe sat 2 rows behind them, with 16-year-old Sophie holding tightly onto her mother's hand. For the first time, several of the women whose lives Daniel affected occupied the same room together. Daniel entered wearing a dark suit and expressionless face, though those who knew him best immediately noticed something had changed. The confidence he once carried so naturally appeared fractured. He avoided eye contact entirely. Prosecutors began by outlining financial fraud allegations tied to shell companies and falsified loan applications. But the emotional atmosphere shifted dramatically once the court turned toward testimony involving Daniel's relationships and false identities. One by one, timelines were presented showing how Daniel moved between states while maintaining overlapping lives under different names. Hotel receipts matched pregnancy timelines. Rental agreements overlapped with marriages. Phone records connected hidden apartments to dates Daniel claimed he was traveling for business. The pattern became impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Then, prosecutors introduced the evidence that changed the entire courtroom. A forensic analyst testified that investigators recovered sealed records connected to a previous civil complaint filed nearly 19 years earlier in Ohio by another pregnant woman accusing a man named Daniel Reed of abandonment and financial deception. Until that moment, nobody outside the investigation knew a third woman existed. Audible gasps spread through the room as prosecutors displayed photographs from the old case beside current images of Daniel Carter. Same face, same birth date, different identity. Emily later admitted that hearing another woman's story shattered something inside her because it confirmed Daniel's behavior was never accidental or impulsive. It was a repeated pattern stretching back decades. But the most devastating moment came shortly afterward, when the prosecution presented DNA analysis connected to Sophie Monroe. For years, Daniel secretly sent money towards Sophie's upbringing, while privately allowing everyone to believe she was his biological daughter. The court expected the DNA report to strengthen claims about his hidden family. Instead, it exposed another layer of deception nobody anticipated. Daniel was not Sophie's biological father at all. The courtroom fell completely silent as the analyst explained the results. Angela began crying immediately, while Sophie looked frozen in shock beside her. Prosecutors argued that Daniel knowingly maintained the illusion of fatherhood to preserve emotional control over Angela, while simultaneously using the relationship to support his false identity. The judge paused for several long moments before continuing the hearing. The revelations continued over the following days. Medical records obtained through subpoena showed Daniel secretly underwent fertility testing. Years earlier, after doctors informed him he was likely unable to father children naturally. Investigators now believed this diagnosis deeply influenced his behavior for years afterward. Prosecutors argued that Daniel became obsessed with creating carefully controlled versions of family life, while avoiding situations where the truth about his infertility might fully expose him emotionally. Psychological experts later testified that many manipulative individuals construct alternate identities to compensate for personal shame, insecurity, or fear of rejection. But regardless of motive, the damage Daniel caused remained painfully real. Women trusted him, built lives with him, planned families with him. And when maintaining those lies became difficult, he disappeared before facing responsibility. Emily listened quietly as experts described emotional coercion, gaslighting, and financial abuse in clinical terms that somehow made her experiences feel even heavier. Because for years, she blamed herself for the collapse of her marriage without realizing she had been trapped inside someone else's carefully managed illusion. From the very beginning, outside the courthouse, public reaction intensified daily. talk shows
Our
debated whether
investigation
Daniel
has uncovered
Carter
a
was a
shocking
criminal
double life.
mastermind or deeply disturbed manipulator.
This fraud
Former
spans
neighbors
years with
expressed
millions diverted.
disbelief
We'll
during
continue
televised
tracking the money
interviews.
trail.
Online communities searched for additional victims connected to his alternate identities. Then, another woman from Arizona contacted investigators claiming she briefly dated a man matching Daniel's description nearly 12 years earlier, before he vanished after discussing marriage and financial investments. Authorities never confirmed how many lives Daniel touched throughout the years, because many records remained incomplete, scattered across different states and identities. But by then, one truth had become undeniable. Daniel Carter did not simply lie occasionally. He built his entire existence around deception. Every relationship functioned like another performance, carefully adjusted for each audience. And perhaps the most terrifying part was how ordinary he appeared while doing it. No dramatic outbursts, no violent criminal history, no obvious warning signs visible to outsiders. Charm, confidence, patience, and the ability to study exactly what people wanted to believe about him. Several weeks later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Grace Carter during a quiet, rainy evening surrounded by her mother and older brother. Daniel was not present. By then, he remained in custody, awaiting further proceedings connected to fraud and identity charges. Emily later described the birth as both heartbreaking and healing at the same time. She mourned the family she thought she would have, while finally accepting that family never truly existed in the way she imagined. Yet holding Grace for the first time also gave her something Daniel never expected her to regain: peace. For months, Daniel controlled the emotional center of everyone's life around him: fear, confusion, uncertainty, shame. But inside that hospital room, none of his lies mattered anymore. Emily looked down at her daughter and realized the future still belonged to them, not to the man who abandoned them. News outlets later published photographs of Emily leaving the hospital, carrying Grace, wrapped in a pale pink blanket, while reporters described her as the woman who helped expose one of the most disturbing deception cases in recent memory. But the story did not end there. Nearly 4 months after Grace was born, Emily received another message online from a woman living in Nevada who believed she once dated Daniel under a different name. Then another woman contacted investigators from Tennessee. Slowly, a frightening possibility emerged. Daniel's pattern may have extended far beyond the cases prosecutors formally presented in court. Some women described brief relationships. Others mentioned financial entanglements or sudden disappearances, eerily similar to Emily's experience. Authorities reopened several dormant complaints connected to identity fraud across multiple states, though many questions remained unanswered. Daniel himself rarely spoke publicly after sentencing hearings began. During his final statement in court, he apologized quietly for mistakes and poor decisions. But he never fully explained why he spent so many years constructing false versions of himself instead of confronting the truth. Perhaps even he no longer understood where the lies ended and reality began. Today, Emily lives privately outside Chicago, raising Grace away from public attention. Olivia eventually rebuilt her life and now speaks occasionally at support groups focused on emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Angela and Sophie slowly repaired years of confusion and pain together after learning the truth about Daniel's deception. And while the headlines eventually faded like they always do, people who followed the case still debate the same haunting question years later. How well do we truly know the people we trust most? Because stories like this force people to confront an uncomfortable reality. Some individuals do not reveal themselves all at once. They reveal themselves in fragments over time, hidden beneath charm, routine, and familiarity until one day the illusion collapses completely. Daniel Carter believed abandoning his pregnant wife would allow him to disappear once again and begin another version of his life somewhere else. Instead, it became the decision that finally exposed every secret he spent decades trying to hide. And when the judge looked down at the evidence spread across that courtroom, the silence that followed was not simply shock. It was the sound of multiple lives realizing at the same exact moment that the man they trusted never truly existed at all. Before you go, let us know your thoughts in the comments. At what point did you realize Daniel was hiding something far bigger than an affair? Do you believe people like him are born manipulators, or do they slowly become that way over time? And if someone you loved suddenly changed overnight, Would you notice the warning signs before it was too late? If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, because the next case we're covering involves a woman who discovered her husband had another family living less than 10 miles away for over 7 years. Trust us, that story changes direction in ways nobody expected.